Vicki Hogarth and welcome to Southwest Magazine. My guest today is Barbie Smith, board member and treasurer of the St. Andrews Civic Trust. Thank you for being here today, Barbie.
You're welcome.
Can we start off just by talking about, for people who don't know, what is the St. Andrews Civic Trust? What do you do at this organization?
The St. Andrews Civic Trust is an organization that's really looking at the preservation of the built heritage of the town and also the cultural heritage of the town. This built heritage is an important resource that brings people into town, and we'd like to help people maintain that.
Okay.
So it was started about 48 years ago, and it's a non-profit organization, and you can learn more about it at our website. So it's the standrewscivictrust.ca. And on the website we have many things that you can look at. You might have noticed lately these maps around town, and these maps are the historic maps done by the St. Andrews Civic Trust. But more importantly, you can actually go on the website, and not only do we have this on the website, but we also have a lovely walking tour of the Maxwell houses in St. Andrews that was put together. And also, it's interesting, you can go up and down every street in St. Andrews, and there's a tour. If you go to a certain street, and you can go on to that. Mm-hmm. If you have it on your cell phone, you can bring it down your cell phone, and it'll tell you about the houses up and down the street. So with COVID, it's a great thing to do Sunday afternoon or whatever.
So for people who are interested in doing this guide, it's available on your website. You can also pick it up in locations around town?
Yes, these are at the hardware store, they're at the drugstore, a dollar store, a convenience store, and the Save Easy, or the Super Save Easy, yeah.
So people who are interested in taking part in the walking tour, just getting to know about more of the historical buildings in town, mm-hmm. Maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the key projects that the Civic Trust has been involved in. For instance, one famous landmark in town is the Pendlebury Lighthouse. What was the involvement of Civic Trust in that historic and iconic location?
Mm-hmm. Well, the Pendlebury Lighthouse, it used to have the Lobster House. And the owner, Bob Estes, at the time, was a member of the Civic Trust. And he was getting to the point that he was going to retire, and made an agreement with the Civic Trust that if the Civic Trust would pay for some sort of a seawall to shore up the restaurant, that he would deed over the lighthouse and the lighthouse keeper's cottage. So that deed was exchanged. And then in 2000, the project was started, and it was a partnership with the provincial government and the local government, and it cost over $100,000, and much of that was raised by the St. Andrews Civic Trust. And of course, you go down there, we're looking at the seawall, the walking around, the restoration of the lighthouse. At one point, the lantern room was taken to the community college for them to try to restore. Unfortunately, when that happened, all the metal sort of twisted around. So at that point in time, we had Mr. Mike LeBlanc, redid and made that top lighthouse that you see today. So that was raised, and it took about 10 years. In 2020, the plaque was eventually put on there, and it's set up for the town.
Another historic landmark, and one I get a lot of questions about from tourists when they come to town, is the Salt Box House. Can you tell me a little bit about the history of that iconic house, and also how the Civic Trust is involved with it?
That's a really good question, because the Salt Box, which is on Queen Street, was one of the homes, I think, was barged over from Castine, Maine. And it is designed to look like a salt box, which has a short roof in the front and a longer one on the back. Although people say that this one is what they call a Nantucket lean-to, because there's a break in the back. Anyway, the Salt Box was one of the homes that the Heritage Canada became involved in. Heritage Canada was begun by several people in Ontario, Pierre Burton being one of them. And Pierre Burton was very interested in St. Andrews, and the Civic Trust the Heritage Canada came to St. Andrews, and they were the ones who helped us with the town plaque. They also dealt with the Pagan House and putting that together. And St. Andrews worked with Heritage Canada very early on. This is in the early 70s. And the way they worked together, the town and Heritage Canada, became sort of a template for how Heritage Canada started to work for other buildings or other towns across Canada. So it was a very important organization. And eventually the government established the Department of Heritage, the federal government did, and the Heritage Canada sort of came in under them like a crown corporation. The first house Heritage Canada took was actually the Pagan O'Neill House.
Okay.
And the pagan part of the house, which is on Frederick Street, is the part that came from Castine, Maine. And they purchased that, preserved it, and then what they do is they put a covenant on it as to what exterior changes, or not making any exterior changes. So the pagan house was one, and then we had the Gladstone Smith. It was Mrs. Gladstone Smith is the person who owned the house when it was purchased by Heritage Canada.
So how many, if we get into the whole history of St. Andrews, back when it was first founded, how many homes would have been floated over around, or would there have been more examples at one point?
There are more examples. Matter of fact, someone was looking inside their home the other day and saw these Roman numerals carved in the beams when they started to take down the ceiling. And thought that could be an indication that that house was come as well. We also have a house that came from New York that is here. But St. Andrews was first established, of course, after the American Revolution. And when the Castine, it was determined that the St. Croix River was the border and not in Castine, Maine. Of course, the Loyalists decided to come this way. The interesting thing, like was done with many Loyalist towns, is the engineers, the Royal British Engineers, came and set up St. Andrews in the grid pattern. And instead of having sort of a center core and spokes going out of roads, that is why this was established. When they set this grid pattern up, they had large lots. And because they had these large lots, there were no major fires in town that often you see in the big cities or in other towns that would just wipe out a whole pile of area. We never had that. So as a result of the 500 structures in the town plat, over 250 were over 100 years old, and many of those up to 200 years old, but that no major fire. And then sort of the fun part of that story is when they were coming back from Castine, Maine, they had established the town into three blocks, the Buckley block, the Parr, and the Morris block. And then what they did for each lot, they put numbers on them. And when the people were coming over from Castine, Maine, and they were on the boats over, they were picking out these numbers to find out which lot that they would have. Okay. So there wouldn't be any arguments, I want this one, I want this one. No, this is when they picked them up. And for many years later, the three blocks were known as that, and that's another using of the granting of the land. They use that same system. So
I wonder if that's where the term lottery comes from.
I don't know. Maybe it could. Yeah, that's a good question. It may be very well. But the other thing that people don't know or might be interested in is that St. Andrews is a major port. I mean, we were more important at one point than St. John. And around the 1830, 1840, there's a lady's diary. She's sitting up where what would be the Algonquin now. Of course, nothing was built up there. She counted over 100 frigates in the harbor. And at the end of every short road was a wharf. We were so busy. And that's why, because it was a successful merchant town, there's so many beautiful homes here. But as you go up the river, see, that also includes places like St. Stephen, and you can see the beautiful homes are up there as well. And that's the reason why. And then St. John became bigger, and I have a belief that if there was a rivalry, we won. We're not St. John. I don't know if that's... So
that was an interesting point you brought up about, do you think that's why so many of the homes are still so well preserved here, is that they were set up so that fires wouldn't?
Yeah, exactly. The no major fires sort of took major blocks away. I think that was a real reason for that, yeah.
And is Heritage Canada involved in St. Andrews being a National Historic District? How did that come about?
That I'm not exactly sure of. Certainly I think they were part of it, and it was another group of people who Yes, I think it was through Heritage Canada, who went to Heritage Canada, and because of the preservation in so many houses in the town plat, they agreed.
I was going to say, it must be something that doesn't come to that many towns to have that designation.
No, it doesn't, that designation. Usually what they do is have historic places, and we have lots of those. We have some in St. Andrews, but the whole of the plat is very rare. I don't think we have another one across Canada that the whole town is seen that way.
Another famous landmark that I think a lot of tourists don't even think of as being historic is the Niger Reef Tea House. Has a really interesting history that I know that the Civic Trust is involved in. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I certainly can. So the Niger Reef Tea House actually was built in the early 20s, 1920. And by a woman by the name of Florence Askoff, and she was one of the foremost knowledgeable women in China, in Chinese art, and at the time, her father was I think had connections to China, and she spent a lot of time living there. She built that tea house not for herself, but for the IODE, the Imperial Order of the Daughters of the Empire. And it was given to the IODE in 1926. She had a very good friend and a well-known American artist by the name of Lucille Douglas. And Lucille went in and she painted, if you've been in there, all those beautiful, the walls. I think there were 5 murals, and I think we still have 4 of them. One is missing. Anyway, so that was used by the IODE, and then eventually it was apartment, somebody had an apartment, and it morphed over different things. And eventually it came into the hands of the town, and it was sat there for a while. And the town was actually, at that point, was thinking, well, we could tear it down, or we could move it to Mallory Field and use it as washrooms. Those were some of the things. And at that point in time, people from the Civic Trust sort of said, well, maybe we can do something. And with the help of the Meehan Foundation, what happened is the Civic Trust restored that. And it was Jeannie Williamson who told them at the time, be careful when you take the walls down, because she had remembered the murals there. So because of her, they were found and they were restored. The building itself was still under the town, so there was an agreement between the town and the Civic Trust to maintain, and that's when they had their tea house established there. Going along with that tea house was the management actually of the blockhouse. So for many years, although the government would pay for the salaries of the blockhouse and maintaining it, the Civic Trust also managed the kids who you get to do their guiding and stuff like that. After about 10 years, the Civic Trust decided that it was not really in their mandate to run something, so they turned the keys back over to the town, and then the town took it over for a while, and then 3 years ago, the town decided to sell it by tender, and which it was, but between the town and the Civic Trust, protective covenants were put on it for the exterior, the logs, the roof, and things. So if something happens, as you saw, they had to do an awful lot of repair, and those covenants helped to maintain the shingles and the roof and the logging and stuff like that. So.
And the beautiful paintings inside, those were covered up for years, weren't they?
For years and years, because they would have had to insulate it somehow if they made it into some sort of an apartment. So yeah, they were covered. And Jeannie just remembered, there were so many people, of course, who'd come and gone, who knew, and they were no longer there to, so this would be in the 80s, I guess, when they started working on that. Yeah.
Now, another building that you're involved in is the Dun Mccoy. Can you tell me, for people who don't know, what that building is and where they would find it and what the history is?
Yes, well, the Dun Mccoy House is the first two-story building in town.
Okay.
And it was 1780s that it was actually brought into town. But it was built in New York, and Mr. Dun had it deconstructed in New York, brought up here, and stuck where it is. The Dun that built that house is the same one who built the other house where Margot and Lee Sackett live. That is on Queen Street. And he was the sheriff of the town and the tax collector of the town at that point in time. But the interesting thing, again, it's an example of many of the partnerships that Civic Trust has done over the years. What they worked with NB Housing, so NB Housing wanted to make it into affordable housing for seniors. And they worked together with the two of them and restored the exterior. And of course the interior, they set it up the way that they needed for the seniors. And it shows that it still works because 3 years ago, the NB Housing came back to the Civic Trust. They needed to do some work on the exterior of the house. The windows needed replacing and stuff. So with the Civic Trust went through, the original windows were wood. And the Civic Trust and the talked to them and they bought new windows. But these ones are not wood, they're vinyl windows. But if you look at them, nobody would know the difference. So that's a really good example for when people are restoring their houses. You don't have to do what they did before. There are so many different products out there that look good and probably perhaps last better. One never knows. But there's a multitude of products now that you can have the same historic look of your house on the outside without having to spend an awful lot of money, as some people think.
It must be an ongoing challenge for the Civic Trust to find all the different parts of history and know the exact date and era and style of the time. Is that something that's constantly talked about and dealt with?
In the first 10 to 15 years of the Civic Trust, they did an awful lot of research on the homes of the town. As a matter of fact, when I was in university, one of my jobs in the summer, I took pictures and to develop them of every structure within the town plat. So I'd bike around, and that meant every building in the back or barn or something like that. So all of those structures we took pictures of, so it'd be about 73, 74. And then we had a historical architect come in and look at all of those houses and rank them and give us information on the house and the value of the house architecturally and stuff like that. Yeah. All of those files are at the at our office in the courthouse. Also, over the years, people have asked us about information. And so the archives, and we collect information, stories about other people. We have file upon files of those, and those are available. So it's just been an ongoing collection over the years of all of these things. People, of course, you know the heritage plaques that are around. So when somebody asks for a heritage plaque, then what we do is we research the house, so we make sure that the information on the plaque is accurate, and then the plaque is put on the person's home. And if somebody actually is interested in having a heritage plaque, if they go to the website, the application form is on the website for the heritage plaque. So all our research of each of these houses, all that is up there.
Now, if someone was, and they're one of my favorite things to read when I walk around town, it doesn't get old. I feel like and the walking tour very much must be a history of the town in homes.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
If somebody wanted to get a plaque on their home, they go to the website, and if they're not sure of the history of their house, are you a helpful resource in that way?
Yes, that's what we do. That's part of the plaque, is to do the research on the house and find out the information. We can do it with them, and go to the archives, show them how they can find this information, or check our own files and see what we have there. Yep.
And I've had the pleasure of doing that with you. I found out my house was a lot older than I thought.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, we did that at the courthouse.
That's right.
Actually.
That's those old pictures that you looked at. Yes, exactly.
So you were very helpful. So anyone at home watching, I recommend, if you're curious,
call me.
It's amazing what a resource and a guide you can be. And I found old pictures of my house. I had no idea it was so old. So I feel a little bit more a part of the history of the town.
Exactly.
And can you tell me a little bit about the courthouse itself and why it's such an important building and how you're involved?
Well, the courthouse itself, as we know, it was built in 1840. And in 1983, when we were looking towards the bicentennial year, Civic Trust was looking for a big project. And they decided and thought about the courthouse, and they got in touch with the provincial government. And through raising of funds, they were able to completely restore the courtroom. And that is getting new lamps that looked like the painting, any repair that needed to be done, felting of the barrister's table was done. The Hitchcock benches, which are the long benches that are there, were restored. And the Hitchcock benches were quite interesting because when the the courthouse was built, they of course needed the benches for the people to sit on, and they got in touch with the Hitchcock Chair Company in Massachusetts. They don't make benches, or they didn't in the 1800s, but they said, yes, we would do that. So if you know what a Hitchcock chair looks like, well, just go to cut the two ends of the benches and put them together. That's what they did, is they just extended. So the Civic Trust sent those benches back to the Hitchcock Company, which is still there. They took them all apart, re-glued, fixed them up, and sent them back. So that's interesting to have that as well. The exterior, a lot of the work on the columns had to be done, and some work on the pediment above. So those were all done for bicentennial year. At the same time, the town, we partnered with the town, and the town wanted to do something, and through Lord Shaughnessy, they were able to purchase, or they were able to make arrangements through the Queen to have copies of the children and George III. George III, of course, is the George that was in power when St. Andrews was settled, and surprisingly, her wife was named Charlotte. And all the streets. I asked the students in school the other day, what are the names of George's children, and they didn't know. And then I said, well, what are the names of the streets? So all the streets are named after George's children. So Gainsborough had painted all but two of his family's paintings, and so we were able to, or through the town, was able to have them reproduced, and then we've put them up there at the courthouse. So it's very interesting when you have a loyalist town, certain streets. The street closest to the front is supposed to be the Queen Street, but of course the Water Street was there already, so we have our Queen Street. It could have been called Charlotte Street, but they called it Queen. The street, excuse me, that bisects the two of the town is supposed to be King Street, or it could have been George Street, so they called it King Street. Of course, Prince of Wales is the oldest son and would be taking over, and Princess Royal is the oldest daughter. So those are where some of those names come from, which is kind of cool.
Wow. So then that would all be in the walking tour as well, I'm sure.
I think so, yep.
I'm curious to know, I think one of the things I love about what your organization does is that you are a resource for the town.
Yes.
And you really involve the community in preserving the history as a collective movement almost. Can you tell me a little bit about what your future goals are in furthering that role in the community that the Civic Trust is already doing?
Well, one of the things that we're working on right now is we have partnered with the Legion and with the Charlotte County Archives, and we want to restore the judges' chambers. And what we're hoping that we can restore the chambers, and then this would provide a lovely place for people to come and have meetings, small meetings and things. So it will be available to the public at certain times to have meetings there, and bring Wi-Fi into that room or into the courthouse so people could use Wi-Fi. And so that's something we're putting a plan together. We're going to send it to the town. So that one you'll have to wait and see what happens.
Now, is there also, from a little bit that you showed me at the courthouse, that you're building a library of pieces of different homes from different eras? If you're looking to, say, restore a part of your home, you can visit Civic Trust and find out exactly what it is, down to moldings.
Exactly what it looks like. That is one of my goals, is to create this library. So of architectural books, we can put in there, like this old house, that beautiful set of magazines that comes from the States. There's lots of different books that we'd like to bring in. As a matter of fact, a lot of them, if anybody's interested, can go to the library.
Okay.
Because we have given the library all of our books, and there's information on every house in a large binder there in the library that was put together about 5 years ago. So if you want to find, you can go there. But it'd be nice if somebody wants to, say, put new clapboard. And you can get wood clapboard, you can get a sort of, there's so many different kinds, and what we're hoping to be able to do is get actual physical examples. Say, this is what this looks like, or here's this one, or this house has used these shingles, they're made out of tires, or this shingle is molded in such a way you can use it 2 different ways. So the more physical examples that people, sometimes it's nice to be able to see and to touch. And then we also have old examples from the houses. We have, it's stored in many different basements and garages. We have bits and pieces of houses. I'd love to pull all of that together and create this library for people. And if anybody has their bits and pieces that they can give to us for our library, love to have them.
Okay, so you can get, how do you get in contact with Civic Trust?
There's an email address.
Okay, I'll put it at the bottom of the screen.
Okay, and Dale, or Barry Murray is the president, and then there's Peggy Hogarth, and I am a member, and we have Rebecca Moffat, and we have, I should remember everybody, but I'm missing somebody. Dale Daphne is a member, and Carolyn Davies.
Oh, wow.
And so those are the members of the board, and if anybody is interested in getting in touch, we would really appreciate that. We have lots of projects that we want to do. We've had some research on resurrecting the loan program that was done in the 80s, where we were able to give no interest loans to people who wanted to, say, restore the window but couldn't afford one that looked alike, so we could give them a little extra help to do whatever on the exterior. We want to bring a program, something like that, back. We'd love to have some help for doing those sorts of things. So if anybody's interested, or if anybody has other ideas, absolutely, we'd very much be interested in
Well, I
getting their help.
appreciate you taking the time to sit with me today, and I do want to recommend to anyone at home, in the time we're living in, especially, a walking tour is a great way to feel a part of your community while staying safe. So you can visit the Civic Trust website to find it there, or you mentioned there are different locations around town as well if you want a paper copy.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Right.
Well, thank you very much.
My guest today has been Barbie Smith from the St. Andrews Civic Trust. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO-TV, New Brunswick's only source for independent community television.